Hi, welcome to another Love Warriors podcast. I'm Bill Hubbard, Director of Charitable Gift Planning, and this is another one of a mini-series that focuses on various aspects of planned gifts. I'm happy to have with me today one of our board members at North Valley Community Foundation, Vanessa Sundin. She is an attorney, has an office here in Chico, and kind of feel like we're kind of in the big world now, because this is a branch office of the main office of JKZ Law Firm in San Francisco.
Correct.
With a new branch office in San Diego.
Yes.
So Chico is ranking right up there with the big boys. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you.
I'll just like to mention that Vanessa specializes in estate planning. This is a pretty good topic for today. Trust administration, probate law, probably a little of everything else, but those are the main items.
I focus in probate, trust administration, estate planning, and tax predominantly.
Oh, yes, the tax.
The smatterings of business and real property typically as they relate to estate planning, probate, trust administration, and tax.
Okay. Well, as you can tell, our topic today is on estate planning, and in particular how we utilize that in relation to charitable gift planning. Let's see, actually, you've been a board member twice.
Yes.
You're on our board the second time around, and Vanessa is also on our Charitable Gift Planning Advisory Committee. Very helpful to have a fellow attorney on there to correct all my mistakes. So let's get going here. One of the first things that always seems to pop into folks' mind is, what's estate planning? What sort of documents do you typically see when you actually are working with a client in estate planning?
Sure. So estate planning is really the collection of documents that we use to help assure that people's needs are cared for while they lose capacity or while they've lost capacity and after they've passed away. So it allows you to make certain that your assets are going where you want and under the terms that you want. For instance, if you have small children, if you have an adult child who has an addiction issue or a disability issue, something like that, or you just generally have some concerns about making sure that assets are held for a protracted period of time the way you would like. Foundational plans will include a revocable trust, which is an instrument that can be changed at any time and will hold assets like real property, cash, investment accounts, and business interests. You need a trust when you have real property, small children, or a business for the most part. In California, you can have up to $184,500 worth of assets in your name at your passing and be able to avoid a probate. Holding a trust with your assets allows you to skip over that probate and that $185,000 roughly minimum when you pass away, and allowing your assets to go where you want and be administered appropriately.
Why the skipping over a will? Wouldn't a will be a lot simpler?
Sure. So a will is used when an individual does not have any real property, again, or a business or minor children. Because if you add beneficiary designations to your investment accounts, let's say, and to your retirement accounts, then those will go pursuant to those beneficiary designations, and you don't need another instrument to direct where those assets will go and still avoid a probate. So wills are really utilized when someone only has cash and investment assets and perhaps a primary residence, and that's it. So there's a very limited swath of people where a will actually be useful, notwithstanding that when you watch movies that they always talk about the will and the executor.
Of course. The interesting part about it, too, is that trusts tend to be a lot more private, confidential. In other words, it's not a court action like probate is, and the rest of the world can see exactly how the estate is distributed. I always liked that aspect of it, especially when you get up into higher levels of value. That probate costs are pretty hefty.
Absolutely. A probate action is always something to avoid if you can. Like you mentioned, probate actions are on the public record, so anyone can go in and pull a document and see what your assets are and how your estate is being administered. On the flip side, a trust, only the parties that are interested to the matter, like people who are inheriting or your heirs at law, can get any information about how your assets are being administered after your passing or if you lose capacity. As you also indicated, a probate administration takes a long time versus a trust administration tends to be a quicker transaction. It usually takes you a minimum of at least 6 months to get through a trust administration as well, but that's much shorter than the year to 2 years it takes for a probate administration.
Okay. What about, I hear frequently people say, well, I don't need to do any estate planning. My home, real estate or whatever is held in joint tenancy. Is that a problem?
So in California, people can hold interest in property as tenants in common, which means when you pass away, your interest goes based upon what you've directed, and it doesn't automatically go to the co-owners of your property. There's other methods of holding title, which is joint tenancy, where anyone, for instance, you and I, who aren't married, can own that property together. But if I die, my interest goes to you automatically. The other scenario is what's called community property with right of survivorship. And that's where, let's say you and I are married. If I die, the assets go over to you. There's a difference with community property versus joint tenancy, where, again, only married people can hold it as community property. And then two, there's a tax step-up issue that's available for community property that's not available for joint tenancy. Now, to your broader question of, well, I have this property in joint tenancy, why do I need a trust? That's true when the first of you dies, but what happens when the second of you dies? At that point, you're ending up right where you were in the beginning of having to go through a probate unless you have a trust. I will say that there's an option in California of being able to add a beneficiary designation to your real property if it's your primary residence. There's also some opportunities if it's a smaller investment property of up to 4 units. You can change that designation through a beneficiary designation on your property, but that's a provisional method of holding title in California, and we don't know if and when the legislature is going to make it permanent. And so until it does, there's a little bit of a tendency for title companies to not love that type of title, and there to be issues after you've passed away, even though you've done the paperwork correctly. So we generally encourage people to go the way of the trust, because that's the solid, tried and true method of assuring that you have real property, you're going to avoid a probate, your assets will still go where you want when you die.
Well, I really like the idea that you can have that confidential type work done by, I assume it would be a trustee that carries out the wishes of the trust.
Correct. Your trust is like a template, a roadmap for how the assets are going to be managed and what responsibilities the trustee has. So the trustee, while they have a broad level of responsibility and sometimes discretion in how to manage assets and make decisions about them, they have to ultimately follow the guidelines that you've given in your trust.
How often should an individual review their estate planning documents?
Sure. So we recommend that clients look at their estate plan anytime they've had a significant life event, like you've had an inheritance, you've had a child, you've started a business, you've added or substantial new property in some other fashion to your collection, but at minimum usually once every 3 years, because legislature changes the law with some measure of frequency. Next year we're expecting some substantial changes in the tax laws. Now that we know what the elections have turned out to be, we kind of have an idea of more where we're going to land on that spectrum. But we still don't know until the ink is dried, right? And even then it's only for a handful of years. Yeah. So it's always important to look and make sure that your documents are in line with your wishes, the value of your assets, and the tax laws that are in place, as well as any functional transfer issues or whatnot that the California legislature may institute, but that's not very common. Yeah. The other thing I would like to add about the foundational documents is a nomination of guardian, and that's a big one for people that have minor children.
Right.
So it isn't the actual formal appointment of the person who will take care of your children, but it is your note to the court that says, hey judge, if I can't make decisions for my child, this is the person I trust to make that decision. The court order will grant that appointment, but that's your opportunity to give feedback of who will take care of your children.
Okay. Normally the guardianship would be in a will. Could it be done that way, or does it need to be a separate document?
It can be either way. Okay. different law firms do it different ways. We used to do it as underneath our will, and then to give the option of you can sign a different outside extraneous document if you want.
The will.
Exactly. Sure. Because my goal is that you don't have to come in to see me necessarily. If you want to update that, I tell people how to do that. We look at the document itself, and if you make something similar, I don't love hiding the keys from clients. And so if it's something simple that they can't really mess up, and it's something that's really important, like taking care of their children, that they have the ability to do it whenever they want to.
Or they find out that the person that they had originally nominated is now under the influence of whatever.
Exactly. And so it's important to it's important to make that opportunity as readily available and simple as possible to people.
In your practice, we might as well shift over a little bit here to the idea of charity being a potential beneficiary of an estate. How does that come up in the conversation? Is it normal that a client would bring it up, or do you intentionally ask about that? I know there's an old saying that there's three beneficiaries of every estate: your family, of course, your friends, and charity. And how do you approach that?
In every conversation with a client about their estate plan, I'm asking about what their family relationships are like, what their friendships are like with their what we consider chosen family, because we have a lot of clients where family means a variety of things, right? And then also part of that conversation is are you wanting to leave a legacy? Are you passionate about any particular social justice oriented issue or community issue? Do you have a church that you're actively involved in? Those sorts of things. And we ask, are you wanting to potentially include something where I would consider it more like a token gift of a handful of thousands of dollars just to commemorate your passion toward that or your relationship with this organization?
Sure. Okay.
Or it could be with people who do not have children and maybe don't have family that they want to incorporate into their estate plan. Or if we have some tax motivated gifts to charity, because of course you get a deduction for tax purposes on the amounts that you leave to charity. So in any context, no matter what the value of the client's estate is, we're always having that conversation of would you like to give something to charity, just as sort of as just acknowledge your passion and and your community, basically.
Sure.
So that's where the conversation starts. And then I find that it's not every client, but I would say at least 50% of my clients are doing some version of, after both of us have passed away, or if I'm single, after I've given the bulk of my assets to my family members, I want to leave some measure of a little something to my church or my community in some way.
So how is that put into a trust document or whatever? What are a couple of the options for someone who does have that charitable inclination? How do they word that? I mean, estates tend to change in size and value and all of that. And of course, in most cases, they have family or friends that they would like to leave assets to. What are some of the ways to designate that?
So there's two primary ways that you can make a gift under a trust, and that's either as a specific gift, which can be anything, right? It can be cash, it can be a real property, it could be an animal, anything at all, right? To any person or entity. And then there's the remainder gift of anything that's left over after we've made the gifts, after we've paid the taxes, after we've paid my expenses. Anything that's left over goes to these individuals or these organizations.
Okay.
So the first question is does a client want to leave a certain portion of their estate to charity or whatever is left? And if it's a portion, then is it a certain dollar amount, no matter what the value of their estate is? Or is it a percentage of their assets? And that could be 50%, it could be 1%. We'll go through with clients, what does that look like with what your assets are now? If it goes up, what does it look like then? So we can kind of figure it out. I like percentages if we're leaving beneficiaries charities more substantial amounts of money, because then it sort of expands like an accordion with the value of your assets. So we're not giving a greater gift or a smaller gift than it is appropriate with the value of your estate when you pass away.
Okay.
So when you're doing that drafting, there's ways that you can give to charities. There's a couple of ways you can give gifts to charities. One is that you can name the charity outright. That's very common. So let's say I want to give money to the Butte Humane Society. I can say, hey, trustee, when I pass away, I'd like to give Butte Humane Society $5,000. Or let's say that I want to give more of my estate, but still a specific gift of, like, let's say I'm going to give $100,000, okay? But I want to leave that money to the Butte Humane Society, to the Jesus Center, to the Torah Shelter, to any, safe space, whatever my passion is.
Right.
And I want to leave chunks of money to all of them instead of leaving the specific gifts to each of those organizations, which may they always exist forever. Don't all, charities do tend to sometimes go by the wayside. But you maybe still want to give that money to a type of charity that is similar, or maybe your goal changes and you don't want to leave money to a particular charity but replace it with another one. Instead of listing all of those 10,000 to this organization, 20,000 to this organization, you can create what's called a donor advised fund.
Okay.
And what a donor advised fund is, it's similar to an investment or a bank account that you establish with, like, the North Valley Community Foundation. It's a charitable organization that is has a fiduciary, meaning a management responsibility of caring for funds that are irrevocably, meaning unchangeably, set aside to charity. So instead of saying, I want to give 10 different organizations $10,000 for my $100,000, I can say, I want to give $100,000 to my donor advised fund with North Valley Community Foundation. Then I create a relationship with you, and I can change who the beneficiaries are under my donor advised fund every day to Sunday. I know you don't love that, but I can, and it's at no cost.
We don't mind at all.
Versus if you've listed those beneficiaries specifically in your plan, then you have to come talk to me and pay me to update that information every time, versus that donor advised fund allows you still to give the charities that you wish and the flexibility to change that whenever you want with greater convenience and less cost. Beyond the idea that a donor advised fund allows for flexibility of changing who your beneficiaries are, so I'm going to give a little just kick over to split interest gifting also. So if you've created an instrument that you can't change the beneficiaries of, adding the donor advised fund rather than your specific beneficiary as the beneficiary allows you flexibility on an instrument you can't otherwise change. So the modification of beneficiaries is beneficial in the context of a revocable trust and also in irrevocable trusts. The reasons that I like donor advised funds, in addition to just that flexibility, are, let's say that I had a significant financial event during this year and my income just skyrocketed, and I really want and need a tax benefit for this year's taxes, but I don't really know what I want to do yet with that money. Exactly. I can put the money in a donor advised fund this year, and then next year or the year after decide what happens with it. Ideally, we're working closely together to decide how that's being managed sooner than later. But you get to claim that tax benefit the year that you make it, no matter when the money is actually distributed. So it's a great way to claim taxes for the time that you need it, and then have some more thoughtful execution on where those monies go. Like you indicated, when you're giving substantial amounts of money, if I'm giving the foundation $2 million, I may not want to give that money all to the Butte Humane Society or whatever my charity is right off the bat. And so instead, I would set it up as an endowment fund where I'm going to then only issue the income every year out to my one beneficiary or variety of beneficiaries. Another thing I like about donor advised funds is that, let's say that I have 4 or 5 different passion areas for, community and social issues, but I don't have particular organizations that I know that I want to contribute to. Right. I can, underneath my donor advised fund or my endowment fund, whatever word you want to use for it, I can say, the person that I've appointed to manage the fund, please make distributions for these particular focus areas. So we're not limiting it to where the money can actually go, but I'm limiting it to the areas that I feel are most dear to my heart. So I love that about donor advised funds too, because I find that clients sometimes get a little stymied about, I don't really know who I want to leave this money to, but I know I'm really passionate about food sustainability or young education or I could, green issues, whatever your passion is. I may not know who the appropriate party is to give the money to, but I know I want the money to go there. So I love donor advised funds for that purpose also.
I might add that we've had a number of clients come in. There have been referrals from attorneys where they didn't have an exact knowledge or even a successor advisor. And we basically talk to them about what areas they're interested in and explain to them that we can also serve as that fiduciary and probably make some pretty good decisions because we know those areas. We know what organizations, nonprofits in our community that provide that kind of beneficial help. So in a way, it's sort of like setting up a designated fund, but leaving the responsibility to charity.
Another reason I like donor advised funds is that, let's say that you want to get your child more interested in finance or philanthropic giving, but you don't want to just give them money to deal with. You can point them with you as the person to make those decisions, or with the trustee of your trust, so that your kids are learning what it means to be charitably inclined, and also learn how to make investment decisions, right? I know that, with donor advised funds, the foundation is really working with advisors, and they're looking at how the assets themselves are invested, but you're still getting statements of what's happening with the money. And then of course you're making decisions if we distribute this amount now, how much is going to be left to continue to grow for further distributions. So I love the idea of it as a playground for kids, so that they are starting to develop civic mindedness and also financial responsibility.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we see more and more folks, especially as they get up in there in age, they're really become quite interested in family philanthropy and get the kids involved, which is a great approach. And oftentimes they're named as co-advisors or successor advisors to those donor advised funds. So,
right.
Well, thank you very much, Vanessa. This has been quite a session. Anything else?
Yes, I would like to add that with donor advised funds, sorry, you can tell I like donor advised funds.
That's okay.
With donor advised funds, the other thing that I love is that you can establish, like, let's say that you name your trust as the beneficiary, or let's say you name your donor advised fund as a beneficiary under your trust. You've established it with North Valley Community Foundation, and then let's say that I every year am making gifts to charity. Instead of making those gifts to charity outright and getting a tax receipt from each of these organizations, which then I have to keep track of and then give to my accountant or handle myself if you're me and do TurboTax, then inputting all that information specifically, versus if I just put all the money again in my donor advised fund with North Valley Community Foundation, I'm only getting one tax receipt, and then I can immediately go and give those out to the same organizations. So I just find that there's so much flexibility with donor advised funds that just why wouldn't you? If you're charitably inclined at all, it is such a great vehicle for being able to do so many different things that I just think that you can't lose. Especially with a foundation like North Valley Community Foundation, where there is no minimum. Sometimes in charitable foundations, whether it's like with your investment institution, like Schwab Charitable would have one, or a community foundation, frequently there are minimums of you need to put in $10,000 for that account to open. But I know that with North Valley Community Foundation, the passion is giving and connection with the community, and not about only making charitable gifting available to those that are wealthy. So that's a thing that I really like about the North Valley Community Foundation.
Sounds a lot like our CEO's comment. We try to help anybody
exactly, and
to be charitable.
Yeah, I think that the donor advised fund is the everyman's version of the private foundation, the charitable foundations, right? You think of Rockefeller or Vanderbilt, all of these institutions that have enormous amounts of money, even like the Gruber Foundation. Everybody you hear on North Valley Community or NSPCR or NSPR, I always get their name wrong after the change of KCHO. You hear all of those big family foundations, and yes, those are big and they had lots of money. But even if you just have, a normal paying job, but you give money every year, that's accessible to you.
They can work with the foundation right here. They have their own foundation in essence.
I love it.
I'd be a little remiss if I didn't add on the donor advised fund concept. We have another podcast that focused with Brian Sweeney on gifts of stock. And this is one of the really cool things about donor advised funds, is that you can, of course, just make a single gift of stock. We've had that happen a number of times. Have it go into the donor advised fund, and then you don't pay any capital gains tax, obviously, on the appreciation. And then you can worry about where you want to distribute those funds to charity instead of using cash. It's a pretty nifty way of doing it. I am sometimes asked, we'll finish off with this. You get a donation, a contribution deduction when you put the assets into the donor advised fund. Mm-hmm. So then you say, okay, I want, like maybe the next year, I want to distribute a certain amount to a nonprofit. Do you get a second charitable contribution deduction when you do that?
If you've added assets
if it's
again.
out of the donor advised fund?
Oh, once the money is made out of the donor advised fund to the charity?
Yeah.
You do not, unfortunately.
Oh, darn.
You only get it once.
Okay. Well, I keep looking for somebody that'll say yes, and then I'll have them be my accountant. And of course, I might mention that we always want to make sure that when we do some of this tax planning, that we consult with the accountant as well.
Absolutely. Anytime you're working with an attorney on tax planning work, that attorney should be conspiring with not only you,
Ooh, I like
should
that
be collaborating with not only you, but also your financial advisor and your tax advisor, because the three together will know you in totem and will make sure that you're making the right choices for your personal circumstances.
Yeah, and I might mention, thanks for bringing that up, by the way. That's one of the major ways for estate planning to operate in conjunction with charitable giving. We always like to emphasize to clients that they can come in and make a change anytime they want to. Sometimes people lose interest in certain charities, or perhaps the charity goes out of business, like you say, or is doing something that they don't like. They can come in and do that. And I might add, we don't charge anything for that. So anyway,
that's always
yes.
a strong pitch for me with clients, is that you can change it anytime you want to without a cost, versus with us, it's just, it's a little bit more like walking upstream. It's just not as easy as going with your approach.
When you have a new client, do you send out some sort of an estate guide or a packet where they can sit down and put down all of their assets and liabilities and that sort of thing before actually coming in?
We do.
Yeah.
So once a client signs up with our firm, we send what's called a personal information questionnaire.
Yeah.
And that allows us to gather information about the assets they own, the liabilities they have, their closest family members, and what the details of if they've been divorced and they're paying an alimony or child support payment, or if they're subject to government benefits like Social Security or perhaps SSDI, or any variety of scenarios there. So it allows us to gain some information about the client before we even get to that first meeting, where we're really getting into the gritty of what do you have, what do you want, how can we do it.
Okay. Well, I might mention that even if you haven't if a client or an individual hasn't made an appointment, we have an estate planning guide as well.
Okay.
So it's just a way to make life a little bit easier for the attorney primarily, because the people can think about it. And I wanted to mention that it's on our website at nvcfgiving.org, which is a section of NVCF website where we have a lot of information about charitable gift planning. Okay, well, Vanessa, looking forward to the next round.
Me too.
Where we get into a little more planning detail that actually works very well for a number of situations for individuals that need income from their assets during life and can later have it go to charity. So we'll have you back again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on over and helping us out.
It's been fun.